Welcome to part 2 of this Bookkeeping Controls mock exam run through. We're going to pick up straight from where we left off, which was on task 6, which is worth 10 marks and is designed to test the process of checking the cash book against the bank statement and updating the cash book appropriately. With that in mind then, let's take a look at the question. The bank statement and cash book for May are shown below. Check the bank statement against the cash book and enter any transactions into the cash book as needed and the cash book balance carried down as at the 31st of May and brought down at the 1st of June. So in this question, what I would recommend doing is selecting using the arrows just here and down here and selecting both the transactions that appear in the cash book and in the bank statement. So we'll start off by doing that within this question. You can do these in any order, just make sure you're matching them up correctly. So let's have a look then. So we have 734, 734, have 515, 515, we have 388, 388, 1916 and 1916. We also have 220 and 220. Now on the balance here you can see that we have a difference. So what I suggest doing is looking whether there is amount usually early on within the bank statement that you can add together with the balance for them to match up with the balance brought forward in the cash book. For example, in this question, if we take the 646 debit balance, so this here, at the start of the month and add on the check for 775, that gives us a total of 1,421. which you'll see is the same as our brought forward balance here in the cash book. The reason it can be like this is just due to timing, as we might have entered the check into our cash book, but it takes a few days to come through in the bank. So we can mark those off. So we've got this, this, and this. We also have the credit for 2442, so let's just mark that one off as well. So now that we've done that, you can see that we do have a few remaining items, and therefore the next step would be to enter those transactions that are on the bank statement into the cash book. So the first of these would be Castor PLC, so this transaction here. So let's enter that in on the debit side of the cash book as money coming in. So go down here, we select the date, which was the 10th of May. And then we've got Castor PLC and enter the amount, which was 4874. The next is a standing order payment to Healy Homes for 492. So before we do that, let's just mark these off that we now entered those in. This next one is Healy Homes, so we can enter that in. So we go 22nd of May. The check number we don't have because it's a standing order. So we just select Healy Homes and enter the amount 492. And that would be on the credit side of the cash book as it's money going out. We just select those two as well to show that they've been done. The last transaction then is the bank charge for £28. Again, would need to go on the credit side because it's money going out. So let's just select the date there. So 24th of May, bank charges and 28. And we can just mark those off. So we should see now that we have everything marked off within our bank statement. There's nothing we can do about this 1607 purely because we can't force it to come through on the bank statement. It would just be a matter of timing. Now that we've entered those in then, that covers off the first bullet point, and the next part was to enter in the balance carried down at the 31st of May and the balance brought down on the 1st of June. All we need to do for this is add up the debit side of the account, so add up the debit side here, and then separately add up the credit side, i.e. credit side here. The difference then between the two sides will be your balancing figure. Remember that the balance carried down goes on the lower side of the account to make the sides balance, and then that balance is brought down back to the original side of the account at the start of the next month. So let's add these sides up and find the difference. So in this example, that would be £2,803, and as the debit side is higher, this will be entered on the credit side of the account. So what we would do at the end of the month, so 31st of May, would enter that in as the balance carried down for £2,803. And then on the 1st of June, we would have the balance brought down, again, £2,803. And that covers off task 6. So we can move on now to task 7. So this task is worth 14 marks and is designed to test the process of matching receipts and payments in the cash book against those on the bank statement, which is similar to task 6. But then on the back of that, we need to prepare a bank reconciliation statement using the appropriate transactions, and you may also have to calculate the closing cash book balance to check that the bank statement has been correctly reconciled. Right, let's have a go at this question then. Marple PLC's bank statement for July showed an opening balance of £3,298 and a closing balance of £2,372. This is the partially completed bank reconciliation statement for July. Complete the bank reconciliation statement as at the 31st of July. So here we've been given part of a bank rec and we've got to fill in the missing figures, starting with the balance as per the bank statement. Well, above it states that the bank had an opening balance of £3,298 and a closing balance of £2,372. Now, with us completing the bank rec at the end of the month, we can ignore the opening balance and just take the closing balance of £2,372. So let's enter that in. The next figure to fill out here is the outstanding lodgements. All we need to do here is add these together. So just 2966, 302 and the 1055 and enter that in. So if we add those three together, that will come to 4,323. We'll do the same on the total unpresented checks. So that would be the 1,842 plus the 2,069 and enter those in as 3,911. Finally, to calculate the balance as per the cash book, all we need to do is take the balance on the bank statement, add on any outstanding lodgements, take off any unpresented checks, and that would give us our cash book balance. So it would therefore be 2,372 plus 4,323 minus 3,911 to give you a cash book balance of 2,784. Excellent. Right, moving on to part B then. This basically follows on from part A. The two questions are linked and it states this is a summary of the debit and credit entries into the bank columns of the cash book as at the 31st of July. Check that the bank reconciliation statement in part A has been completed correctly by calculating the amount of the bank balance carried down and the total of each of the bank columns after the balance carried down has been recorded. Now, to calculate the balance carried down, all we need to do is add up the debit amounts within the left-hand column here, and then take off the total of the credit amounts in the right-hand column. Let's add those debit transactions up then. So these ones here, and that gives us a total of 9,112. And now let's add up the credit transactions, so these ones here, and that gives us a total of 6,328. The difference between these two figures will be your balance carried down, so that would be 9,112 minus 6,328 to give us a balance of 2,784. Now the bank column totals would literally just be the highest out of your debit or credit side, and therefore it would be 9,112. So let's enter these two figures in. So the balance was 2,784, which is good because that means it checks out with part A as well, which was the balance as per the cash book up here. And then the total on the bank columns was 9,112. So that covers part A and B. So we can now look at part C. So this is a bank statement and cash book for July for a different organisation. So this is an entirely new question, and we see that we've been given the bank statement on the left here and a cash book on the right hand side here. You are preparing to produce a bank reconciliation statement at the 31st of July, starting with the balance taken from the bank statement. Identify two transactions that should be entered into the bank reconciliation statement as amounts to be added. Now, if it's amounts to be added, it would be referring to income. Therefore, we're looking for two income items. So step one here would be similar to what we've done previously, which is to match up the transactions between the bank statement and cash book. So remember what I said with regards to the opening balance. If they don't match up, then look for another transaction early on in the bank statement to add to the opening balance and see if it then matches the cash book opening balance. Your other option, and probably better option here, will be to do the difference between the two opening balances and look for that figure on the bank statement. So with that in mind, we would do 2,496 minus the opening cash book balance of 1,907 to give you a difference of 589. And we can see that that relates to this check here. So check 017461. So if we did the balance of 2,496 less the check being paid out of 589, that would match with our opening balance within the cash book. Okay, and again, this will be down to, or more than likely be down to timing. So let's just check those transactions off. Let's keep going then and match off the rest. So 778, 778, 401, 401, 1095, 1095. Then move on to the credit side of the cash book. So we've got 755, 755, 325 and 325, 1177, 1177, and 673 and 673. Excellent. Now that's done then, we can go back to our question where we need to find two transactions to be added within the reconciliation. It would therefore be the two debits within the cash book for Waldo PLC, so this one here, and Fred Vanks, which is this one here. As these are the only two income transactions that aren't already in the bank statement. So let's select those two and enter in the values. So we've got, let's just scroll down, we've got Waldo and we've got Fred. Let's just enter in those amounts, so 2546 and 527. That covers off part C. So moving on to part D then. Identify two transactions that should be entered into the bank reconciliation statement as amounts to be subtracted. Again, we only have two options to choose from here, which would be, so we've got Quip Limited and DAX Printing. So let's enter those two in. So we've got DAX Printing and Quip Limited. Let's make sure we get the amounts right here. So we've got 461 and we have 668. Fantastic. Just to say as well, in terms of this is looking for two transactions that will be subtracted. So these would be both subtracted because they are payments from the bank account. So we're going to add on any income items that we did in part C and subtract any payments in part D. And that covers off task 7. So let's now look at task 8. So task 8 is worth 14 marks and is designed to test the preparation of journal entries to correct errors within the bookkeeping system, and where relevant, the preparation of journal entries to clear the suspense account. Taking that into account then, let's have a look at the questions. A suspense account has been opened with a balance of £950. The error has been identified as an entry made in the general ledger from the discounts allowed daybook shown below. The total of the net column had been recorded in the correct count but on the wrong side. Prepare journal entries to remove the incorrect entry, record the correct entry, and remove the suspense account balance. Right, now the first journal is to remove the incorrect entry. Let's just remind ourselves what the error is. The net amount has been posted to the discounts allowed account on the wrong side. Then posting for discounts allowed within the discounts allowed account should be a debit as it's an expense to the business. Therefore, if it's been posted on the opposite side, they have credited the account rather than debit it. So let's draw up the T accounts and see what's gone wrong. So we can see on the left that this is what it should have happened. And on the right, this is what has actually happened. So by the time we've completed these journals, we should end up with a debit balance of 475 on the discounts allowed account. Step 1 then is to remove the incorrect entry, and to do this we will debit the discounts allowed account, bringing the balance on the account back down to 0. Step 2 is then to record the correct entry, which as we know should have been a debit within the discounts allowed. So again, we will debit the discounts allowed. The effect of this is that we now have an overall debit balance within the discounts allowed account as it should have been in the first place. The final step, step 3, is to clear the suspense account balance. It states within the question that the balance on the suspense account is £950. Now, a little tip here, your journal has to balance. So as you can see, we've entered 2 debits, which means for the journal to balance, the entry to the suspense would have to be a credit, or the debits and credits wouldn't match up. Another way to think about this is that the original entry should have been a debit entry, but was accidentally put in as a credit. Therefore, the system would automatically debit a suspense account in order to make up the account's balance. Another way to think about it is that the original entry should have been a debit entry, but was accidentally put in as a credit. Therefore, the system would automatically debit a suspense account in order to make the account's balance. To clear that, we would therefore have to credit the account. Now, if that's too complex, that second method, then just go with the first way of thinking. So with that in mind, let's jump back to the question and enter those transactions in. So we have discounts allowed, debit, discounts allowed, debit, and then to remove the suspense account, we'd select the suspense and credit. So that covers part A. We'll now move on to part B. Another error has been found in the general ledger. A cheque payment of £630 for motor vehicle repairs had been entered in the motor vehicles account. Ignore VAT. Prepare the journal entries to remove the incorrect entry and record the correct entry. So effectively here what's happened is that we've debited the motor vehicles account rather than the motor vehicles. Again, let's bring up the T account and have a look at this in more detail. So this is what should have happened, and this is what has actually happened. We need to get from what has happened to what should have happened. So step 1, remove the incorrect entry, and to do this we would credit the motor vehicles account, reducing the balance to 0. Step 2 is to record the correct entry, which would be to debit the motor vehicle expenses account as it should have been in the first place. So let's now enter those in. So we want to select our motor vehicles account and credit that for 630, and then select our motor expenses and debit that one for 630. Brilliant. So that covers off part B. And the final part here we have is part C. A transaction has been omitted from the general ledger. A backed receipt of £1,664 from a credit customer had not been recorded. Prepare the journal entries to record this transaction. The entry to record a receipt from a credit customer would involve 2 accounts, the sales ledger control account and the bank account. The entries would then be to debit the bank to show the money coming in and a credit to the sales ledger control to reduce the amount owed from credit customers. So let's enter those in. So we want the bank and we want the sales ledger control account. We want to debit the bank to show the money coming in, and we want to credit the sales ledger control to reduce that balance. And that finishes task 8. Slightly more challenging, that one, especially if you struggle with double entry, because you need to recognise what the entry should have been in the first place before you can correct them. So now moving on to task 9. So task 9 is worth 10 marks and is designed to test the process of posting journal entries to the ledger accounts, followed by balancing off those accounts. Right, let's get into it then. Let's just remove that there. The journal entries below have been prepared to correct errors. Record the journal entries in the general ledger by placing the appropriate entries in the accounts below. Now for this task, the pitfall for students is overcomplicating it. What they actually need to do is exactly what it tells you to do. So literally to the letter, follow what it's asking you to do. With that in mind then, the first entry, it says suspense debit 982. So what we need to do is debit the suspense for 982. So we take this, so 982, and debit the suspense. Okay, it can't be suspense because we are in the suspense account. You can't debit the suspense, which would then go to suspense if we selected this one here. So this detail here has to be the other account that it's actually going to. So we would then go to the heat and light and credit it for 982, which it tells us here. So go to heat and light, credit it for 982. So go to heat and light, credit it for 982. The next journal then is the one on the right here. So it says heat and light debit for 353. So what we need to do is go to the heat and light account and debit it for 353. So again, you can't select heat and light and put it into the heat and light account because we're already in the heat and light account. So it is the other half of the transaction. So we then go to the suspense account and credit it for 353. Like so. So this one it's really quite straightforward once you know what you're doing. Like I say, just follow it to the absolute letter, and remember that you cannot have the detail the same as the account name because we are already in that account. So with that in mind, then we can move on to part B, and it says on here, go to the drawings, debit it for £1,500, the other half of the transaction being the bank deposit. So what we do is we go to drawings and we debit it for £1,500. Then we go to the bank deposit account, which is here, and we would select our drawings for £1,500 and credit it. Because it tells us again in the question, credit the bank deposit for £1,500. The next one then, it says loan from bank, 1,850 debit. So what we want to do is go to your loan from the bank and debit it for £1,850. And then the other half of the transaction, it says go to the bank deposit, credit it for £1,850. So that's exactly what we do. So the last part then is part C. What will be the balance carried down in the bank deposit account? So we know how to balance accounts by now, or should do. So it's basically the difference between the two sides. So add up the debits, which in this case we only have one, so 15,100, and take off the total credits. So if we do that then, that would leave us with a balance of 12,150. So let's enter that in. And it's asking for the balance carried down, which remember is entered onto the lower side of the account. So we can quite clearly see that in this example, the debits are higher than the credits. So the balance carried down, as I said, being entered in on the lower side would therefore be a credit. And that wraps up task 9. So this is one where, like I say, people really do overcomplicate this. It is actually quite an easy 10 marks if you follow exactly what it's saying. We can now move on to task 10 then, our last task. Now this final task is worth 14 marks and is designed to test the use of a suspense account to balance the trial balance and the subsequent adjustment of account balances from journal entries prepared to correct the errors within the trial balance, which is the official description, but in simple terms is basically a trial balance and some suspense accounts with the occasional journal sprinkled on top. So it's actually just a super complex description for this task if you look at the examiner's report, but truth be told, it's actually quite straightforward. So with that in mind, let's jump straight in. On the 30th of September, a trial balance was extracted and did not balance. The debit column totaled 202,832 and the credit column totals 203,307. What entry is needed in the suspense account to balance the trial balance? Should be fairly straightforward, this one. Work out the difference between the two columns, i.e. 203,307 minus 202,832 to give the difference of 475. And that will always be entered on the lower side, so in this example, the debit side. Again, just to reiterate, when doing this type of question, it will always go on the lower side. You can't reduce the credit side, for example, you can only increase the lower side. Therefore, it would be 475 on the debit side. So that covers part A. Nice and straightforward. Let's move on to part B then. The journal entries that have been prepared to correct the errors and clear the suspense account are shown below, and it gives us some journal entries. Calculate the new balance of each account after the journal entries have been recorded. Well, firstly, we have general expenses, which has a balance of 15,732, and expenses would be a debit. So if the journal entry is a debit entry of 397, this would increase the balance on the general expenses. So the balance would therefore be 15,732 plus 397 to give us a new balance of 16,129. Now, on the bank interest received, this is classed as an income account, but with the journal being a debit to bank interest, that would therefore reduce the balance within the bank interest received because you are debiting a credit balance. Therefore, to calculate the new balance, we would do 199 minus 78 to give us 121. So let's get those two figures in. So this one was 16,129 and the bank interest received was 121. And that covers part B. Again, nothing too complicated there. Moving on to part C then, which is to complete a trial balance. So to do that, it says we need to insert the figures of the first 7 accounts in the debit or credit column, and then insert the balances you calculated in part B in the debit or credit column. And then total the debit and credit columns. Right then, let's go through each of these then. So capital is money owed to the owners of the business and therefore a credit. Cash at the bank is an asset, so therefore a debit. Furniture and equipment is also an asset, gain would be a debit. The purchase ledger control is money owed to our suppliers and therefore a liability and a credit. VAT owing to HMRC, well, if it's owing to HMRC, it's a liability and therefore a credit. Cash sales is income and therefore would be a credit. And purchases is cost to the business and therefore a debit. Alright then, all we need to do now is enter in our balances from part B. So general expenses we know is a debit, so that would be 16,129 as it's an expense. Bank interest received is then income and therefore a credit. So we can enter that in. The last part then is to add up the debits and enter the total, and then add up the credits and enter the total. Now, they should, in theory, both equal the same value, otherwise you've done something wrong. So we kind of know in this whether we've got it right or wrong because the two sides should equal the same amount. And in this case, if we do add up our debits and then we add up our credits separately, they both come to 203,307. So we know we've got it right, or more than likely got it right. Technically it could still be wrong, but the chances are it would be right. Right then, that does complete the exam. It was quite a journey. I do hope you've found this useful. If you've got any further questions or you don't feel like I've covered something and you're still not sure, please do let me know in the comments below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. But if you have enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I will be bringing out further videos on AAT 2, 3 and 4. So like I say, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching and I will catch you in the next one.